Welcome to Philosopher Rock. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. Welcome to Philosopher Rock. Oh yes, I am your introduction host. So why is Johnny here in your ear at the intro? Well, let me tell you. Let's go way back into podcasting history, maybe 12 years back. There was a podcast formed in South Africa called Futurequake South Africa. And later it was joined by GK about a year later, and it became Futurequake Southern Hemisphere. This is way back in the early days of podcasting. Later, Futurequake Southern Hemisphere became Like Flint Radio, which all the archives are still available at likeflintradio.com. Sometime after that, but still way back in history, GK did a study of the King James Bible, explaining everything there is to know about the history of the King James Bible, history of the King James Bible podcast. So any people who are really interested in like how the King James came to be and all the stories behind it, like everything you could possibly ever want to know. And it's a long series, so you will be an authority once you listen to that. But then sometime later, GK and Brian teamed up to create this show, Philosopher Rock. During all that time, going back some 12 years, these were my boys. We hung out together on doing podcasts together. I'm Johnny from The Iron Show, ironshow.com, owner of the Fringe Radio Network, and GK and all the people from Like Flint Radio. They were my boys. We hung out together. And since GK and Brian know that I'm a major Yes fan, they invited me to do the intros to these Yes sessions. In this particular episode on the Yes series, Brian and GK are going to be digging deep into the philosophy of Yes, and they're going to be covering the Fly From Here album and Tales from Topographic Oceans. Tales from Topographic Oceans, I first heard that album when I was on mushrooms, I think, or it might have been Strawberry Mescaline, back in the late 70s, probably 1979. And I was blown away. We were tripping out on hallucinogenics, and my friend Kirk said, dude, check this out, man. I just got this album. It's called Tales from Topographic Oceans, dude. I'm like, oh, wow, man. And the album cover was really trippy. And it just blew my mind. Side 1, The Revealing Science of God. It just takes you on this journey. It's spiritual. It's musical. It's thematic. It's conceptual. It's really some of the very best music of the 70s. I would not suggest that you partake in hallucinogenic substances like magic mushrooms or peyote cactuses. But if you happen to be on them right now at the moment, I would advise you to go to YouTube and type in, Yes, The Revealing Science of God. Because if you're high right now, you're going to need to hear that. So it'll change your life, man. It'll change your life. Once again, this is Johnny from The Iron Show, ironshow.com, owner of the Fringe Radio Network. That's fringeradionetwork.com. Welcoming you to Philosopher Rock. And without any further delay, let me take you away to Brian and GK.
Well, welcome back to Philosopher Rock. This is episode 9 and part 2 of our discussion about the British prog rock group Yes. Now, if you listened to part 1, what did you think of that? Did you have any thoughts? Did you want to share them with us? If you haven't heard part 1, you need to, as it really is a prerequisite to this episode. So to find that, you can go to our website, www.likeflintradio.com. That's likeflintradio.com. On the front page, you will see the Philosopher Rock icon. And if you click that icon, you'll find every episode of Philosopher Rock. Or you can go to YouTube and search on YouTube for Philosopher Rock, and you'll find us up there. Okay, let me introduce myself. I'm GK, and I'm coming to you from my little bush hut studio in Queensland, where the weather is hot and the fauna are deadly. On the line with me, from a much safer place in the world, is Brian. Welcome back to the show, Brian.
Thanks, Garth. Thanks for having me. I would say I'm coming to you from a mud hut in the middle of urban Cincinnati or suburban Cincinnati, and it may be just as dangerous here, but for different reasons.
Yes, it might not be the fauna.
Right.
Well, here we are again, Brian, and I don't know, you and I have just discussed what we thought of part one. We had to listen to it. And, in some ways, I wonder if we, maybe probably failed a little bit to do the band and their music justice. And it's really hard in just 2 sessions to do that. I know we've said it a number of times in part one. It's so difficult to fit over 50 years of their history in these sessions. However, as Rick Nelson so clearly informed us, but it's all right now. I learned my lesson well. If you can't please everyone, you gotta please yourself. There you go. So really, it was a subjective ride through, yes, for us, and we could have gone on for a lot longer, and we still could, we still might, I don't know. So we really did. Look, I know we've got a little bit of feedback from people, and a couple of people have said, you might have missed this, you might have missed that. And people, I acknowledged it. I like the more commercial albums that Yes have. I prefer them. I like the whole catalogue. I don't know if I made that clear. There's nothing I don't like, but if you try to pin me down, there's 2 or 3 albums that I absolutely love. Hence the subjective nature of episode 8. Now, I can't promise this episode will be more objective than the last one, but we're going to give it a shot. So we'll try our best, Brian.
Yep. And I'm always curious too. So what? Just so I can get this out of the way, because listeners might be thinking about this. I'm thinking about it. How do you define commercial? That's what I'd like to know. You say you like the more commercial stuff from Yes. What do you? I get 90125. That's commercial, or Big Generator. That's commercial. But you even said that you thought Drama was commercial.
Well, I think it's more.
Sounding.
I think it's more what could be more radio friendly. There's certain of those songs that you could get away with playing on the radio. Now,
Gotcha.
if you took an album like Topographic Oceans, right? And you said, okay, let's just play one song. Now, we both know that some of those songs are 20 minutes long, right? I'm exaggerating here, but, with all the segues and all the prog rock that's happening in there and all that, really way out stuff, you're just not going to get away with it. But with some of the albums that I've talked about, the reason I say commercial is because a lot of it you could play on the radio and people would get it. They'd say, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. And some of it did make it to the radio. And some versions were, some of those songs are edited down for radio listening,
right.
So that's sort of what I mean.
Gotcha.
I still do like the long form stuff. It is my preference. Like I'd really like a lot of those songs to go on even longer, because that's just how I am, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, that's what I mean. But I do like everything else anyway. I just couldn't name something that I don't like. So probably easy to say that.
And I agree with you on those points. Yeah. So I was just curious because Drama is, in my opinion, the quintessential example of perfect prog rock. Because it's got everything. And so that's why I was wondering about just the term commercial, but I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, just think, could we edit this down for radio and, let it loose on the general populace?
Yeah.
In this part 2, we really want to hit a fair bit more about the philosophy, because we're called Philosopher Rock. So, we've done the history, we've done some of the personalities, and we're going to still talk about the bits and pieces of that here. But in this episode, we want to hit more of the philosophical side, the underpinnings of the music and things like that. But Brian has allowed me to talk about one more album before we do that. And so, I'm really sorry to the audience about how subjective some of this is, but Brian's agreed to let me talk about the album Fly From Here. And then after that, we will get into more of some of the philosophical stuff. But I wanted to talk about the album Fly From Here. Now, Fly From Here was released in 2011. It's Yes's 20th studio album. And it was their first studio album in 10 years. And it's the longest gap that they ever had between two studio albums as well. Interestingly, it also sees the return of the Buggles duo, Jeff Horn and Trevor Downs, to the fold. The story of this album, it's quite complicated, and there are a lot of toing and froing, personnel changes, lineup changes, and lyrics and all that stuff. There's a whole lot to this, but I'll just try and condense it down to something that's a little bit more simple, and try and keep the story simple. But let me say this. I just read today, I was reading a great interview that Steve Howe did when this album was released, and he said that it's a complicated story behind it. But the band had been in hiatus for a few years for a number of reasons, and including the poor health of both Wakeman and Anderson. So this led to the inclusion into the band of Wakeman's son Oliver on keys and Benoit David on vocals. Now, is that how we say his name, Brian, as far as you know, Benoit?
Yeah, I believe so. Okay. That's how I would say it.
Yeah, well, that's what I thought too. And my French is, zero, so forget it. So Benoit David is a Canadian singer who he fronted a Yes cover band called Close to the Edge, and he was discovered on YouTube and invited to join the band. Now, there've been a few singers in tribute bands who have had this fantastic thing placed upon them, invited to join the actual bands that they're covering. I mean, how good would that be if it happened to you? Would you like that, Brian, if you were, say, in a Judas Priest band and they said, hey, can you come and play guitar for us?
I don't know. That'd be a little bit frightening. Now, I think for sure guitar. Now, if somebody asked me to be the vocalist in a certain band, then I think that would possibly be less intimidating. But I think it'd have to be the right band because, first of all, I'd have to question the judgment of anybody who'd want me to front their band. But I'll tell you, though, I've had several dreams that Uriah Heep has gotten a hold of me and asked me to front their band. So I think I'd snap that up in a heartbeat. That's
interesting. Uriah Heep, like it. Okay. Yeah. So good response. I liked your answer. Okay. So, I've mentioned this album sees the return of Horn and Downs. So we are going to be talking again about the Buggles duo because they had recorded but not released the song We Can Fly From Here as a demo before they joined Yes the first time way back in 1980. Now, I didn't know this, but that song was performed live by Yes during the drama tour in 1980. Did you know that one, Brian?
No, I didn't.
No. So, but the Buggles version of the song, and this version, apparently a re-recorded version, was finally released by them in 2010 as a bonus track on the 2010 reissue of their second studio album called Adventures in Modern Recording. And you can go onto YouTube and have a listen to that. I think it's called Fly From Here Parts 1 and 2. I think that's the 2010 reissue of that. But the Yes album, Fly From Here, it's got about a dozen tunes on it, but it opens with a 6-part suite called Fly From Here, and it runs for about 24 minutes, and it's followed by another, 6 standalone tunes, basically. The 2011 Yes release has Benoit David on vocals, Chris Squire, as ever, on bass, Alan White on drums, Steve Howe on guitar, and let me say there is some great guitar work on this album. Brian, does it stand out to you?
It does. It's a little bit, I would say that it's great in the sense that Howe goes a little bit outside of what he normally does, I think. He's a little more reserved, I think. And I like there's a little bit of more edginess going on in some of the stuff too, which I like, which is really kind of a throwback to drama. I mean, it's, on the whole, I think it's got Horn and Downs' fingerprints all over it, you know what I mean? So, yeah.
Yeah, they're all involved, but yes, that's a good way to put it. Well, to that end, talking about, there's a long list of guitars that he used on this album. The Gibson ES-175, a 6-string Martin, a 12-string Martin, a Ramirez Spanish guitar. Here, how about this one? A Fender Dual 6 professional steel guitar and a Gibson Les Paul Jr. And there's the track that's called Solitaire. Now, it's an acoustic guitar solo by Howe. And on that, he plays a custom-built, I don't know this guy's name, but Theo Shapash SKD, a handmade steel string acoustic guitar that was built for him in 1989. So I think that range of guitars tells us a bit of a story as well, because you basically just sort of alluded to that, I think. The rest of the personnel on keyboards, you've got Oliver Wakeman, and I think he plays on 4 tracks. And then they brought Jeff Downs in. That's why some of this is a bit confusing, because part of the confusion comes from when they shift from using Oliver Wakeman to Downs partway through the recording process. And this is somewhat typical of Yes, and it's sometimes hard to keep up with who actually recorded what and when. But they know, and you can look for it and you can find out, but it can be a little bit confusing. And I think Trevor Horn was on production. If not this version, then the 2018 version, which I'll talk about now. All right. Okay. So now just to muddy the waters just a little bit more. In 2018, a new version of the album called Fly From Here, Return Trip, was released. Now it had Benoit David's vocals replaced by those of Trevor Horn, and Downs and Hal also recorded new keyboard and guitar overdubs, and it was all remixed by Horn. The album includes the full version of the song Hour of Need, a previous unreleased track, Don't Take No for an Answer, written and sung by Howe and recorded by the group during the album sessions. So that's pretty nice, isn't it? Now, for some more subjectivity, I'll come right out and say this. I like the Return Trip version better, right? I like the 2018 better. And it's got a special spot in my CD collection as my wife bought it for me on a very special occasion. And I think it's nice that this version has got all the members from the Drama band, the Drama album band, are all back together again. But I've got a feeling you've got a different point of view, Brian. Which version do you prefer?
I prefer the original 2010 version personally. Right. Mm-hmm. There may be a couple of different reasons why, but I'll tell you, I'm remiss in the fact that I didn't go back and re-listen to the 2018 version again right before we recorded this, because I intended to. So, I mean, I could talk about some of the reasons that I thought, the original one was better, but I mean, I don't know if you want to go into that right now.
Why not?
So I think that, first of all, when Fly From Here was released in 2010, it wasn't on my radar, no pun intended, because there's there's some imagery in the lyrics. But anyway, I wasn't expecting a new album from Yes, so it was a surprise to me, and when I got it, I was just blown away, floored. Like this was like everything that I've been wanting from Yes and hadn't heard in forever, and it was immediately apparent to me that this was like in the same vein as the Drama album, which I've always wanted more of anyway. So just kind of like the fact that I was so blown away by it, it's like for them to do a repackaged version or whatever, to me, it was just like, I don't need that at all, because the first one's perfect. The only thing you can do is mess it up from here. And I think that's honestly what they did in a way. Now, I respect their choice to, they're able to do whatever they want. It's their music, but I think it was unnecessary, and maybe you can enlighten me, I don't know, as to why they decided to do it. Because Benoit David's vocals on the original version, which I guess really isn't the original version anyway, right? The Buggles version's the original version. So who's the imposter here, But, so like Benoit David's vocals are so perfectly done, and there's a feeling, there's a vibe that was lost, or at least is different on the Return Trip. And I just really loved that first offering, the 2010 offering.
Well, I do like them both, but I'll go to preference for this one. I think Trevor Horn himself said that he believes his vocals cut through, because it's mostly their music, right? He believes his vocals cut through the material in a more powerful way, which is how he wanted it done. Oh man, I don't want to misquote the guy, but I think that's roughly what he said. But I hear what you're saying about, something perfect, you don't mess with it. But this is just my preference for this one. But Brian, I was going to ask you, I think that you were going to talk about, sort of moving away from that a little bit, but the subjectivity, but moving to the lyrics of Fly From Here. Did you find something in there?
So when the album was first released, I was looking online just to try to read some of the reviews, and this was back in 2010. Well, one of the things that really surprised me was, a review that popped up online was through a Christian outlet that was reviewing the album. I thought, okay, well, it's not strange for Christian outlets to review secular albums, but this might have been before I actually heard the album. I can't remember, but so their take on it was, their assessment was that, Yes is treading lyrically in territory that could be, considered vaguely Christian. And so that intrigued me because as a Christian, I always love when I get the best of both worlds, when I get musicians and albums and music that I like with lyrics that I can relate to as well, especially ones that could be edifying as far as my Christian faith. But
right.
So you've got one of the tracks that really stood out to me on there was the Fly From Here Part 3, and that's Madman at the Screens. And what they're talking about in this song, the lyrics seem to suggest that they're using analogies through this whole thing of like airport traffic control kind of scenario or whatever. And there's a lot of aerospace or what's the word I'm looking for?
Yeah,
because it's
aircraft and sort of imagery and even sounds are used, right?
Yes. And so when you get this image of the madman at the screens, it kind of makes me think of the idea of like the air traffic controller, kind of like the person who's kind of running things and directing things. And in the song, Madman at the Screens, he's kind of talking about, get the impression that he's talking about like there's like an evil entity kind of like hiding behind things in the shadows that's directing things. And that speaks to me from a Christian perspective, because the Bible says that basically Satan is the one who, the evil one is the one who's the Lord of this world right now, so the evil that we see going on is directed by entities in the spiritual realm, which would be kind of like the behind the screens, a madman at the screens, the one who's in the control room, like who's kind of overseeing and watching things. Now, we know that God is actually sovereign over all that, but the idea that there's someone like for us, for this time and period in our, in reality or in the world, there's been sort of Adam has been usurped as the ruler of this world, handed down to Adam by God, and he's been usurped by Lucifer, who's in control of these things. Says really, really quick, I just want to go to the idea that in Scripture, when Jesus is in the wilderness for 40 days, Satan approaches him and tempts him. He takes him to the pinnacle of the temple, and he says, everything you see here, looking out over the land, he's like, I can give you all this if you just bow down and worship me. Well, there's a reason that Lucifer says that, because he has been given control for this time period over this earthly realm. He could conceivably give it to whoever he wants to, and we see some of that later played out in the book of Revelation, which I won't get into right now. But so anyway, suffice it to say that listening to the lyrics on some of these songs and Fly From Here, you get the impression that they're touching on some themes that are Christian. And this struck me a little bit because of the philosophies that these band members, specifically, I'm talking more about Howe and Squire, that they hold to, and Anderson, even though he's not a part of the band. And I'm not sure really what Benoit David's ideologies that he holds to are, but they come from Howe and Squire traditionally have come from a more Eastern philosophy kind of thing. And so for them to have lyrical content that points a little more toward something Christian sounding, was interesting to me. It grabbed me right away because I'm like, what's happening here? Is there a shift going on in their paradigm?
Well, it's funny you mention that because just before this album got underway, remember I spoke about the ill health of Wakeman and
Yes.
Anderson. Well, Wakeman is a Christian, and Anderson is, well, we'll talk about a bit more of that, but he's definitely not a Christian believer.
Right.
And so those two got removed from this album because of health, and two other guys came in to replace them. So I just wonder if you were thinking about that I was just thinking about it while you were talking. I was thinking, oh wow, that's weird. One of them who would have been a believer and may have had some Christian input, and another guy who was who's not necessarily a Christian, who knows what cosmic mystic stuff Anderson would have added to this. So it's very, very interesting.
There's another track on here too, "The Man You Always Wanted Me to Be."
Yes.
Which sounds like, I don't know if you were going to cover this, so I don't want to step on your toes here.
No, I wasn't. No.
But it's another song that sounds like it could be, as a Christian listening to it, I'm listening to this. This is a song about sanctification. Like, if we were to read into, and I don't know that I'm necessarily reading into it, but let's just say for the sake of conversation that, this is sounding like a person who's enlightened to now enlightenment in the Eastern philosophy is different than enlightenment in Christian, beliefs, but an awakening, let's call it, to the truth of, the ultimate truth or whatever. So in Christianity would be, God, Jesus Christ, Savior. And this song kind of sounds like almost like a testimonial of someone who has come out of the dark, lost, slumber of unregeneration, being unsaved through the blood of Christ. And this is kind of like their new status, and almost like a description of sanctification. Now I'm able to become the man you've always wanted me to be. Well, we ask the question, who are they talking about? Who is it that has always wanted you to be this way?
Yeah.
And there's some key lyrics in here that make me think, and I've always been hopeful, because I want everybody to be saved, and so I'm always hopeful when bands who are just happen to be in my line of sight, musicians, famous rock musicians, I'm always hoping, somehow they're gonna come to the saving knowledge of Christ, and so it's like, when I hear things about them being sick, or when I hear things about them having struggles, I'm praying, and hoping that this is going to be an inroad to them having to reach for something outside themselves. So anyway, that song struck me as well as being something that had touches of what I could see as possibly being some Christian ethos or whatever.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. So anything more on the Fly From Here album?
No, other than, I wanted to use that as a springboard, basically, just to get into talking about their philosophies. So, if you're ready, I can sort of dive into that.
Yeah. Look, there's a few things that I know that you're going to talk about, and I don't want to derail you in any way, but I can't wait to hear what you got to say about UFOs.
Okay.
Well, but I'll let you take off wherever you want to, and let's see where we end up.
Oh, well, let's fly from here then. Sorry, that was really bad.
No,
I'm a dad, so I'm allowed to make these kind of stupid dad jokes. But anyway, so we've already talked about a little bit about the idea that Eastern philosophy plays a strong part in Howe and Anderson and Chris Squire's ideologies, their mindsets. And so the idea of, for those who don't know, what I wanted to do was just kind of give an overview of what Eastern philosophy is, and it's so rich and so grandiose and so complicated and complex. There's so many parts to it that it's hard to land anywhere in particular, and we wouldn't be able to do it justice. Kind of like the whole thing with talking about the band. It would be difficult for us to cover everything in this episode. So I just want to start off by kind of taking a step back, and let's just start with the correspondence view of reality. So we're going to get philosophical here. And I want to purposely, sometimes I want to purposely use terms so that people will learn something. If I talk in complete layman's terms the entire time, that may be helpful, but I want people to come away with our episodes with a little bit better knowledge of music, but I want them to also come away from our episodes with a little bit better knowledge of philosophy in general too, because I have a passion for both music and philosophy, hence the name. So the correspondence view of reality is basically just holding to the idea that reality is whatever corresponds to what's true. So when we look around this world, whatever we can discern as being actually true, that's what reality is. Sometimes the term like A equals A, and there's A equals A and A equals non-A. So there's truth and false, A and B. Bivalence is what another term that's commonly used. And as we've talked about in previous episodes, and I think that's helpful if we maybe touch on this in every episode, is the idea that any worldview has got to answer at least a couple of questions. That's the purpose of the worldview. And a worldview is just a belief system. So in this case, we're talking about Eastern philosophy, or Eastern worldviews. But the questions that they need to answer are, where did we come from? So what are our origins? And one of the things that I think is important about origins is that it's got to be revealed to us by a source that's credible. So it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for me or to me to think that any human being would be able to tell us where we came from. We're going to have an outside source for that, for the origin of human beings. So then the next question would be, why are we here? What's the purpose of our existence? Again, I think at the base level, that's going to have to be told to us or revealed to us because the creator, if there is a creator, which I believe there is, but if there's a creator, then the creator gets to say what the intention is for our creation, what is expected of us, why we're here. The problem of evil, and this is going to be a big one for what we're talking about today, Eastern philosophy, the problem of evil or suffering, and then destiny, where we're going, where's everything headed? Is there a telos, which means a goal or a purpose or an end in mind? And so, telos is just a Greek word for goal, or so. Let's look in a little bit on the problem of evil, because this is a big thing that everybody's, it's always at the forefront in society all the time, every day, in our lives, even personally and socially. You get the whole Black Lives Matter thing and social justice. All this stuff falls under the category of the problem of evil or suffering. So the Eastern philosophies especially, and like I said, this is so rich, I can't cover everything here. So people are going to have to give us a little bit of grace. Then they're going to say, well, what about this? What about that? These outliers here, and you didn't cover this or talk about this. But basically, Buddhism says that life is suffering, and the suffering is based on the fact that we have desires, and the desires that can't be fulfilled, or can't be fulfilled satisfactorily to completely satiate us. That's what causes suffering. And Buddhism, at least, is a monistic ideology, and for those who don't know what monistic means, it's just basically, it can be easily summarized as oneism, that all is one. And so right off the bat, I think we're hitting a wall here. We're going to have problems with this idea of oneism. They believe that there's no distinction, or the problem is that we make distinctions when there are none. And that there's no duality in reality, that everything is one. So this immediately throws up a red flag for me, because I'm thinking that they've got, Buddhism holds to Four Noble Truths, And so right there we've got distinctions, right? We don't have one noble truth. We have four noble truths. And this is going to be the problem that plagues Buddhism specifically, and maybe even Eastern philosophy, is these contradictions inside the worldview. And it's always helpful when we assess a worldview, we have to assess the worldview from inside itself. We have to step into its story in order to assess it. It's not fair to assess it from the outside. A lot of times people wrongly assess a worldview or an ideology from the outside and say, well, you can't do this, you can't believe that, this can't happen. But we have to step inside the worldview and look at its inner workings to see if it all works together, or if there are any contradictions. So, and broadly categorized too, Buddhism and Eastern philosophy is going to fall under the category of New Age. So when people hear that term a lot, the New Age philosophies and New Age beliefs, Buddhism is going to fall under that. And same with Taoism, Hinduism, Jainism. These are all like New Age philosophies, basically coming from the East, the ancient East. Whereas we live in the West, where we have a little bit of different spin and departure from Eastern philosophies. But so things like veganism, which Howe, at least Steve Howe from Yes, is a proponent of, and I believe Anderson is too. I think he's waffled a little bit on that, but so things like veganism, it comes from the idea that it's wrong to kill anything that's alive. Well, I'm sorry, but life feeds on life. That's my term, by the way. Patent pending, copyright on that, because I'm going to use that for some lyrics and song lyrics coming up too, and some upcoming stuff. So life feeds on life. I mean, there's just no way around it. I mean, something's going to die in order for us to survive. And the veganism falls, and for those who don't know, veganism is just the idea of like vegetarian diet, but it goes beyond that. It gets into even being careful and conscious about the clothes you wear, what the clothes are made of, if there's been any kind of animal suffering or involvement of testing on animals. So veganism kind of takes vegetarianism and goes to the nth degree with it. So I know that Howe is a proponent of that, Steve Howe. There's the idea of Gaia worship or the green movement, and underneath what we hear today in common parlance in society as the whole green movement in quotes, underneath that, underpinning that ideology is the idea of Gaia worship, which is basically put as the kind of like worshiping the earth, that man is here for the earth just as much as the earth is here for man, I guess would be a good way of putting it. And in a Christian belief, we would say that the earth was given to man for man to use, or for man to oversee and be the steward of. And what's going to happen in a lot of these belief systems is man and nature and all the things about reality are going to be in a certain hierarchy of rank. And with the Eastern philosophies, an interesting and strange thing happens, and this is part of the dichotomy that we face within this worldview, is the idea that man gets put on a level, he gets demoted in one sense. And in that sense, I mean that he's no more important than the earth. And so in a worldview like Buddhism, where there is no God, so to speak, like a transcendent God like we believe in Christianity, then basically because all is one, all are equal. So we're going to have problems with that. I mean, what does it mean that, because a river is the same as a man, and we see this in nature worship. So, don't pollute the rivers, green movement, don't cut down trees, kind of thing. So man loses his position as the caretaker or steward of the earth to becoming the same as the earth. And what that does is, like I said, it demotes man. And in the Christian belief system, we believe that God created man in his image. So that doesn't necessarily mean he looks like God. I don't have time to go into the problems with that. What it means is that we were created with some things that make us like God. First of all, our value and importance. So Buddhism is going to demote us in that sense. It's going to take us to making us just as important as a tree, so to speak. And I think that's wrong-headed, because what happens is bad ideologies can result from thinking that human beings are equal to a tree in importance. So, I mean, a lot of the atheistic, because Buddhism is atheistic, a lot of the atheistic regimes that have risen up, and totalitarianism and throughout, and persecution and oppressive ideologies that have arisen in the past in human history, are all based on these ideas that a human being is no more valuable than, say, a tree, or, I mean, literally a rock. And to demote human beings in such a way is we can see the problems that's going to cause. Like, what does it mean? What's the problem with oppressing somebody? If I've got bigger guns than you and more money than you, then it's not a problem for me to enslave you or to treat you like I would treat a tree or a rock. Now, some of the dichotomy and some of the contradictions are going to come into play here with these kinds of ideas is, so man is one, monism says that all are one. So that means really, ultimately, man is God as well. So if man is no different than God. Some of these terms start to lose their meaning. And so we've got this problem, this friction between the idea that man is the same as a tree, equal and on an equal footing, but then man is God. Then it just gets really confusing. Are you still with me, Garth? Some of this stuff's getting a little difficult to digest.
Yeah, no, look, it can get a bit heavy, and also a little bit out there. You're wondering, what we're going to hang on here. So therefore, I'm using a bit of logic and reason here to try and work this out.
Right.
What happens to logic and reason, let's say, in Buddhism? Can you answer that?
Yeah, so one of the interesting things, and this is going to be another jumping off point for me, is that logic and reason are looked at as not necessarily good things, because the idea is to transcend all these things and to be awakened to the idea that all is one, that there is no other. And so the Buddhist or Eastern philosophies make use a lot of times of TM or transcendental meditation to attain this enlightenment. Now, I think personally, in my Christian convictions, I think that this opening up or opening up of oneself through meditation and transcendence actually opens us up to entities and spirits that really do exist in the spiritual realm and can be harmful to us. It's like opening a doorway, and letting something else in, because in the idea of transcendental meditation, it's the idea is to lose the sense of self, to no longer exist as a self, because in Buddhist theology, there is no such thing as self, because there is no distinction, which again is really troubling for me to try to be on board with this, because they're talking about life is suffering and all is one, but when just the term all is one, that's a distinction. They're making distinctions in order to try to do away with distinctions. So there's problems with the logic here. Now that's why they have to throw logic and reason out the window, because they realize that, whether they realize it intentionally or whether it just becomes apparent to them, that they're going to have to let go of logic and reason in order to hold these beliefs, because to use distinctions to defeat the idea of distinctions is contradictory and circular and all kinds of problems. So logic and reason don't necessarily apply. Now, there's things interspersed throughout their lyrics, the lyrics of Yes, that allude to these ideas. So Shoot High, Aim Low, right? The song off of Big Generator. Awesome song. Amazing song. Love it. One of the lyrics is, who says there's gotta be a reason? Who says there's gotta be an answer? And it's like, there's some problems with these types of thinking in that if you put forth this question, who says there's gotta be a reason? Who says there's gotta be an answer? Well, the question begs for an answer, right? The questions don't ever arise unless there's an answer. And really, at the very least, the answer to Anderson's lyric here is going to be, the answer is that there is no answer, right? I mean, that's still an answer. So this worldview is just really wildly circular and self-refuting, and it's really difficult to grasp a hold of, and it's so esoteric that I think on the whole, it's human beings aren't really able to relate to it if you really think about it. It doesn't satisfy the answers or the needs that we have for these answers. When I mentioned the worldview questions at the beginning, talking about origin and purpose and problem of evil, their take on it is that there is no evil. There is no, and really at the base level, really they're going to have to say there really is no suffering, and then that you just awaken to the idea and the realization that there is no suffering. But we all know that that's not true, because we can look at the newspaper. We don't have to even look at anywhere else but outside of ourselves to know that there's a problem. And if there's a problem, then there is some sort of break, which means there's some sort of fracture. There's some sort of separation. And in the Christian worldview, our separation is from God. Our break is from God. The rift, the chasm that exists is between us and God. And
you mean the separation that we have from God is what you're getting at?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So in Buddhist or Eastern philosophy, the separation is an illusion, that there really is no separation, that people just think that there's a separation, and that's why they're suffering. Now, and I think that another thing that factors into the Christian worldview having much more validity and weight as far as being relatable to human beings, and I believe this is because it's true, is the fact that we know that the problem has to do with us. There's a guilt attached to us. We know that we've done something wrong. Now, I don't really want to unpack all of Christian, theology here, but just because we don't have time, I have the interest, not the time. But so Christianity says that, look, your break, the rift, the problem is that you have turned away from God. God's here waiting for you to turn back. But your sin, your bad behavior, your rebellion is inherent in you, not from God, but since the fall of Adam in Genesis 3, there's been a break and a split between humans and their intended purpose that God purposed for us. That's the telos. That's the goal. And that's what's causing all the pain. So when people behave badly, I mean, let's just put it in, like I said, in layman's terms, people behave badly. They don't do what they were created to do. It's kind of like, a dishwasher, you put your dishes in and it breaks the dishes every time. Well, that's not the purpose of the dishwasher. So we've got problems. And human beings were not created. Our purpose was not for evil purposes. It was to worship God. And, if we were in right standing and we were living a life that glorified and worshiped God and doing the things that fall under that category, then there would be harmony. We would experience harmony. We wouldn't have evil and suffering. So from a Buddhist perspective, it's just to realize that there really is no suffering. There is no evil. There is only just the one kind of thing. And, you get glimpses of this kind of like philosophy in movies like Star Wars, the Force, be at one with the Force kind of thing. And you hear these type of things in society today, especially as of late, where it's this pull to come back to the one. We're all one. We are all, the whole New Age idea is of us, humanity coming together as one. And that's not necessarily a bad thing in certain terms, but we have to realize that individuality is a gift from God, that there should be diversity. And that's the whole idea of what I mentioned in a few episodes back, university. It's unity in diversity. For us to be different, have individuality, but have a common interest, and that common interest really should be God, and following and worshiping Him. So before I get too far off of that, you had asked about the idea of UFOs. So this is an interesting thing that it's no surprise that ufology and really, I mean, occult topics fall under this, this broad umbrella. So as a Christian, I would say that there are other entities out there, spiritual entities, and that there's a spiritual realm. The idea of UFOs, because on the Yes album, Tormato, there's a song called Arriving UFO, and with Squire and Hackett and Squacket, there's some lyrical content that talks about UFOs, the idea of, space brother kind of thing. Now, I don't know about you, where you land on this, Garth, but I don't have there's no reason in Christian theology to deny that there may be other beings even living on other planets in the universe. The Bible's intent is not to talk about that. That's not the focus. The Bible stays focused on Jesus, and because, the real goal is to know Him and to have a saving relationship, and not have to endure the punishment for rebellion against God, who is Jesus in the flesh. But, so the idea of, people in outer space, or creatures or beings in outer space, it's not anathema to Christianity, so to speak. I mean, it's possible that there are beings that live out there now. And like I just said a minute ago, I believe that there are other entities. Now, whether they're spiritual, where they reside, I've got my own ideas on that. But I think part of the draw, or the appeal of the UFO and Space Brothers and these beings who are these aliens or whatever, I think the appeal to that is one, first of all, I think humans have been hoodwinked a little bit, and they've not been told the actual story of who these entities are. Because if these entities, or at least some of them, are nefarious and have, an ill will toward men, and they are sharing information with us, if that's happening, then it may be that they're doing it to lead mankind away from God, and to draw us into something sinister. Now, of course, no evil person usually presents themselves as being evil. We talked about that, I think, in another previous episode, that they're going to show up or come to us as with the intent of trying to be helpful. Though we can see the outworkings, like Jesus said, you can tell a tree by its fruit. So we can see the outworkings of, the behavior of these things, these entities or beings. We can kind of gauge what their intent is by what we've heard about them. Well, what do we have? And alien abductions, all kinds of surgeries or probes and things like that don't sound pleasant being done at the hands of these so-called UFOs. And there's another problem, a big problem with the whole idea of the UFOs and, the inhabitants of the UFOs and things like that. There's the idea is we're going to always have to ask, and this is going to come back to the worldview question of origins. We're always going to have to ask of these entities, well, where did you come from? So we're going to dance around the problem of an infinite regress, like there's got to be a source from which everything else came. So if these beings are living out in the universe on different planets or whatever, we have to ask them, where did they come from? And it's not going to be a satisfying answer for them to tell us that they've always existed, because there is a theory about the universe that it's eternal, and that theory falls into the Buddhist worldview that the universe is eternal. So when we have that, we have an infinite regress. We have logical problems. Of course, they're willing to throw logic out the window. So it's not any surprise to me that beings who don't give an account for their existence fall under this broad umbrella too. And some people might have a problem with, just in case there's a listener out there who's wondering, well, God's going to have to give an account for where he came from. But the problem is, like I said, at some point we're going to have to reach rock bottom here. In order for things to even get started, there's got to be a source who needs no other source. It's called contingency. Something or someone out there that does not depend on something or someone else for its existence. And lo and behold, we find in Scripture, in the Bible, that God claims to be Yahweh, claims to be that particular person, that entity, that he is the source. He is the ground for everything else. He does not rely on anything else. So we've got an answer there. Now, is that answer perplexing to a human mind? Yes, it is. It's very mystifying to think of a being that exists in and of itself out of necessity. But we're going to have that if we see that flowing out of reality. Like I said, when we talk about correspondence view of reality, we don't see things just coming into existence on their own.
Can you just remind me what that is again, Brian?
What's that?
Correspondence?
Correspondence view of reality is I hold to my view, at least, is a correspondence view of reality. That means that reality is what corresponds to what we actually see. So we don't see things. So the problem with an infinite regress is just going to be you're going to take the argument back a step ad infinitum, ad nauseum. It's never going to end. You're never going to get an answer. And that's where I think Anderson's getting lyrics like this. Who says there's got to be a reason? Who says there's got to be an answer? Well, what I'm saying is, you're saying, all of us are saying there's got to be an answer. We're all looking for an answer. And for someone to invoke an infinite regress and just say, well, who says there's got to be a start to the whole thing? Well, we've got good, sound arguments and sound reasons for believing that there's got to be a start to everything. If we look at a whole line of dominoes that are falling, it doesn't make any sense, and it's not helpful whatsoever to say, all these dominoes, there's no first one that started falling. They've just always been falling. And that doesn't correspond to reality in our so far perception of reality, that things just can or have been just going on. Motion is a big problem with regards to this.
G'day, this is GK, and you're listening to episode 9 of Philosopher Rock, which is part 2 of our examination of the band Yes. If you want to check out our previous episodes, just go to www.likeflintradio.com and hit the Philosopher Rock icon, and you can listen to every episode at your leisure. Also, if you want to contact us, you can email us at philosopherrock@gmail.com. Now, this will be our final episode for 2020, and we plan to be back in 2021, as we have far more episodes planned than you can poke a stick at, so stay tuned. So, as this year draws to a close, and what a year it has been, but as we close this year out, on behalf of myself and Brian, I want to wish you a wonderful Christmas and a bonza New Year. God bless, and thanks for spending some time with us on Philosopher Rock. Well, what I was going to say, Brian, and this is just my humble opinion, but I think most of us, when we realise that we're separate beings, like separate beings from our families, separate beings from our parents,
right.
Most of us, maybe not exactly in these terms, but we want to know, who am I? Maybe where I come from, but who am I and where am I going? And I think what happens is, when those questions can't be answered, we find ways to try and block out the noise. I can't answer those questions. I don't know the answers. Therefore, I'll just say, well, blow it. I'm going to go over here and do this. And that might be, throwing yourself into, well, I'm certain a lot of people who turn to the heavy duty drugs and that, they are in that situations where they haven't had a found a solid foundation, so they just think, well, blow it, I can just go and do whatever I want, and without thinking of too far ahead of the consequences, because they haven't found out who they are. They're not grounded, and I think it's a somewhat of a danger too when especially young people come disconnected from society or disconnected from community, that they tend to care less about themselves and care less about those around them. So I would argue that people who say, oh, well, just let the kids work it out for themselves, that's not necessarily a good thing, because a lot of times kids can't work it out from themselves. They need guidance. And so they need, I guess what I'm talking about here is, something that's, on the one hand, you're talking about something that's nebulous. You can't quite grasp a hold of it. I just can't, I just can't grab that thing, compared to something that, say, you and I might believe, that we believe it's solid, right? Like, we believe the scriptures are what they say they are. We believe in that firm foundation. Now, I'm not saying just because you don't believe exactly like I do that you're a bad person, but and that I'm some sort of a superhero because I do. But what I'm saying is I would rather have a solid foundation, what I believe is a solid foundation to hold on to, than something that's nebulous and out there and that might lead me into who knows what path down, that might go who knows where. And you see it, like I said, I'm using the example of people that sort of throw their lives away on heavy drugs or whatever that thing is. It's because they don't try to hitch onto a solid foundation. And I know I needed that in those times that I know where I was seeking when I was a young person. And it took a few years to work it out. Well, I don't know how to put it, and I think I said it in episode 1 of this show, but sort of God reached down his hand to me. I said that's metaphor, but he reached out to me and said, lean on this. So I went and investigated more about him, and that's why I chose to do that. But because who knows where I might have ended up, and I'm not saying my life's turned out brilliantly, because it hasn't necessarily turned out that way. But at least I am happy in the foundation that I've found. I just can't deal with that sort of nebulous stuff that, that you just don't have the solid answers. Anyway, I hope that made sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And I think, one of the things that I just want to drill down on what you're saying is the idea that we're looking for an answer. It seems very odd that there would be no answer when we have such a drive or a desire. Like, so C.S. Lewis, very prolific Christian writer, he has a thing called the argument from desire. And as human beings, we have, like, kind of like you were talking about as children or, teens or whatever, one of the things that kids really want from their parents is rules and guidelines, because it gives us foundation, like you said. It gives us something solid to stand on. And the whole idea of like the postmodern movement and now even more ridiculous post-truth movement, it's like this whole idea of shifting paradigms, and like you said, nebulous is a good word. And it just strikes me as, even to make a statement as to identify as a post-truth, I mean, that's a truth claim. You can't, we're not going to get around the truth. We're not going to get around the foundation. And the drugs that people reach out to, that's what they're latching onto, the drugs as a foundation. Because none of us is equipped to, and this is back to the correspondence view of reality. I mean, we look at it and we say, sure, we don't want rules. But we have to have them. There's no escaping them. There's no escaping the truth at a bedrock level. There's no escaping a foundation. It's just going to be, and here's where it comes into our sin nature, our fallenness away from God. Our desire, we're conflicted because we have a desire to have a foundation. But we want that foundation to be whatever we say it is. We want that foundation to be whatever truth we come up with. And why? Because we want to feed our own appetites. We want to be in control. We want autonomy. We want to be God. And how interesting that in Genesis 3, when the serpent, and I'm not going to unpack all what the serpent, I'm not necessarily talking about that it was literally a snake. I'm not saying it wasn't, but when the serpent entices humans to sin against God, he pitches it as a sort of like, God's kind of keeping things from you, and he knows that he doesn't want you to be like him, and you're missing out on all this stuff. If you partake, if you rebel, and partake of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you're going to be your own God. And that was the appeal. And look what happened. We turned into creatures who want to be our own gods. What he said was actually true, that we will be as gods and will act like we are gods. It's interesting too that Adam and Eve, the first thing they do is imagine if you have two people in union and then there's a division that happens. Well, what happens? You look at each other, and if you both are looking at each other thinking, well, I'm God, who are you? There's going to be conflict. And that's exactly what we see in our world today. We see conflict. We see division. I mean, for crying out loud, like the powers that be right now are actually monopolizing and working off this whole premise of division. They don't care. Divide over something. Divide over whether you wear a mask or not. Divide over the color of your skin. Divide over, your social status, like whether you've got money or not, and it's all about pushing division. And it's interesting that all this stuff is happening from the occult standpoint during the age of Aquarius, which is supposed to be the water bearer, everything flowing back together. But see, for us to deny the division, which is what Eastern philosophy wants us to do, is just so counterintuitive. That's why we've got to throw logic and reason out the window if we want to hold on to this thing. And we have to try to eliminate the self in their economy. We have to eliminate the self, because the self's going to sit here and think like, well, I've got these desires. And the thing about the desires is desires were given to us by God. They're not bad. Now, because they've been twisted in our fallen state, they're out of control. And so we put the desires up too high, and sometimes they get twisted. So where a desire for, let's say, a desire for sex is not a bad thing. But now that we're fallen in a sinful state, our desire for sex gets twisted, and it's sex at any cost, sex any way I want it. And it's an abandonment of those rules and guardrails and boundaries that are in place to keep those things good. Like as a kid, it's not necessarily bad for us to do, like, let's say, I don't know, have a snack or something. But, think about the kid's proclivity to want to just eat junk food 24/7, and it's the parent's job, or it's the job of rules and regulations or boundaries to keep that under wraps, because our fallen nature is self-destructive, and it's going to cause us to go off the rails and destroy ourselves. And how interesting that Buddhism, its sole purpose is the destruction of the self. So to me, this worldview, if you cash it out and see it to its end, it's very problematic. And I think it's counter to what human beings really want and desire. And I think it's counterintuitive to human flourishing. So, let me talk real quick. I want to touch on the idea of the way that Yes used their music. Okay. Because when we first talked in episode 1, we talked a little bit about the jazz influence and even the classical influence, which I think are at odds with each other. I know you like the whole juxtaposition of themes, because I do too. Because I think it's more of an honest. I mean, that's duality, right? That's not oneism. That's not monism. Juxtaposition is based on the idea that there's at least duality. So, and I agree with you. I love it because I think it just represents who we are, and it represents reality. But so you've got Yes in their, inception, talking about how they wanted to move away. They wanted to be quote unquote progressive and move away from the standards that were popular in music at the time. So they incorporate things like jazz, right? So jazz is often looked at as a more free-form, flowing, evolving, constantly changing, perpetual change kind of like style of music. But then you couple that with the idea that they use classical music in their music a lot. And those two are at complete odds with each other if we view them that way. They're totally juxtaposed, because classical music is highly structured and highly rigid, and jazz is typically, like I said, thought of as more free form and flowing, kind of unfettered. But I think the problem with the way people view things like that, like jazz music, and I'm using that as a metaphor for other things in Eastern philosophy too here, but is the idea that they mistake the complexity for a lack of order or a lack of form. Because I think just by calling jazz categorizes it. It categorizes it as a thing. It identifies it. And otherwise we couldn't call it anything. And that's really what Buddhism is telling us. Just stop talking. Stop. Just don't even rationalize. But the fact that we do, so going back to jazz again, I like to think of it like this, where someone might look at something and want to see, or even possibly whether they want to see or not, they see something that they can't organize. Doesn't mean that it's not organized. I think it's just that the organization is so complex that we can't wrap our minds around it. And I think that that's what people are seeing in the world, and the appeal of Buddhism is they're going, I can't wrap my mind around this, therefore it must not make sense. Back to Anderson again, who says there's got to be a reason, who says there's got to be an answer. I mean, he's asking a question, he's expecting an answer. I think that there is an organization that goes deeper than what the human mind can fathom fully. And so I think that there really is no such thing as complete chaos or order. Like I said, you've just categorized it. You've found a way to define it. How can you say that it goes beyond definition, which is what Buddhism is trying to teach us? So I hope some of that makes sense, but I know it gets way off into the ether here, but that's just the nature of this worldview and belief system.
Well, I think, Brian, that the discussion about the Eastern religions and you're doing a bit of a comparison there with some of the things that maybe you and I might believe, but they definitely do have that in their yes, I'm talking about, and mainly Anderson and Howe, I think it is, but and maybe Squire to a lesser extent, but they definitely do have this bent towards that Eastern sort of stuff. To support my argument here, I'll just take you to the 1973 album Tales from Topographic Oceans. Now, it was their 6th studio album. They were riding a bit of a wave of success. People knew who they were. Now, this album it's very, very strange in this point that it's, yes, you would expect it. There's that word. Yes. Yes, you would expect it from Yes being a prog rock band, in that it's a double album and it's made up of 4 sides and it's only got 4 tracks on it. And the tracks range in time from between 18 and 22 minutes. Now, all of the lyrics were written by Anderson and Howe. Now, they're all based on Hindu texts, right? So this is where I'm building on what you were talking about. They're bent towards the Eastern religions. And apparently Anderson was reading a footnote in a book called Autobiography of a Yogi by Indian yogi and guru. Oh man, I'm going to say his name here, and I'm probably going to butcher it, and apologies to this guy, but Paramahansa Yogananda. There you go, Yogananda. Okay, and it described 4 bodies of Hindu texts named Shastras, right? Now, so side 1, if we can call that the first side, which is the song called The Revealing Science of God, which is, I don't know if you've listened. Do you know much about this album, Brian? Have you listened to it much?
I do have it. I've got it on vinyl, and I've listened to it a few times, but I've shared with you off record that this is like my least favorite album by them, for a couple different reasons. Some of it's got to do with the idea that, well, I won't go into it. Let's just say it loses me. And it doesn't engage me in the music. Like the lyrics have lost me, and then the music itself, like I'm just not a fan of it. It's probably my least favorite album by them.
Well, okay. So I think this is another thing we've got in common. I think it is my least favorite album too. But it did sell in pretty good numbers. Let me read you something that Steve Howe said. Yeah, well, it's sold really well, and it's the one that you and I are saying, well, I'm not right into it, maybe. the bottom of the list maybe. But let me read you something that Steve Howe said that might put wheels on it, and then I'll go back to the Hindu side of things that I wanted to talk about. But Steve Howe said side one was the commercial or easy listening side of Topographic Oceans. Side two was a much lighter, folky side of Yes. Side three was electronic mayhem turning into acoustic simplicity. And side four was us trying to drive the whole thing home on a biggie. So that's what Steve Howe's version of it. So you can even see there that each side of the album has got something different to say. But each side is based on these Hindu texts called Shastras, right? So the revealing science of God is based on the Shruti class of Hindu scripture, which this guy described as scriptures that are directly heard or revealed, in particular the Vedas. The side two, the song called The Remembering, relates to the Smriti, literally meaning that which is remembered. And so this guy Yogananda wrote that the Smritis were written down in a remote past as the world's longest epic poems, specifically the Mahabharata and Ramayana, which are two Indian epic poems. And I've tried to read those in the past in my life. And for me, they're a little bit heavy going. I don't know. But, you could see where, okay, Yes and Anderson in particular can make music out of these things. You know what I'm saying? Side three, the song The Ancient. It's attributed to the Puranas. So that means ancient allegories, ancient times, ancient allegories. Side four is called Ritual, and it's related to the Tantras, and that means rites or rituals. And so this album is drenched in Hindu literature. So it's no surprise to hear you talking about their penchant or leaning towards Eastern philosophy in the music. Now, it's not as clear cut and dried as it is on this album. That's why I chose this one to talk about. I think I wanted to bring that one up in particular, and there would be others, and there'd be other individual songs where you could really pick them to the pieces. I mean, the song, but you could really pull it to pieces and demonstrate that this is Eastern philosophy and Eastern thought. So does that kind of bring home what you were trying to say if I just sort of use that to sort of underpin what you were saying?
Yeah, it does. I guess since you brought up Hinduism specifically in the Vedic texts. Yeah. So there's a couple of things I guess I'll jump on here regarding the Vedic text. So the Vedic texts are interesting, especially with regards to when we were talking about the UFO thing earlier. So there are allusions and basically like out and out spelled out texts that talk about like UFOs basically. They've got different names for them, Vimanas, I think. My terminologies might be off, but I haven't looked at it in a long time. But so maybe I should draw a parallel here between Christianity and Buddhism, because I think any worldview that people are willing to consider, it doesn't contain all error. I think that it's got to have truth. I mean, I don't think there's a way around it including some kind of truth. So not to get too far off into tinfoil hat mode here, but the idea that because a lot of these Vedic texts were talking about battles between these like supernatural beings, right, and use these flying crafts and things like that. But we see in history, the history of mankind, and it doesn't matter what text you use, we see these ancient texts, they talk about battles between these gods and things like that. And so if there are supernatural entities, it's not surprising that they would necessarily have like either advanced technology or some kind of, we'll call it technology that we can't fathom or whatever. And it's interesting that you've got this talked about in the Bible. Like I said, the Bible's its intent is not to give us an overview of history, especially like paranormal type things. The purpose of the Bible is to point us to what is our salvation, how we can be saved, because it's for us. It wants to redeem us and let us know the right way to go. Now, in Buddhism, so they have, the word gospel is just basically another word for good news. And the Bible is the gospel of Jesus Christ. And we can be saved by appealing to Jesus, who lived the perfect life, who did everything right, no flaws, not only did he live a perfect life, but he was perfect in the sense that he had no sin nature. His nature, he wasn't born fallen like humans are. We're born after our kind, which is our kind, or let's just say like a cow, like a cow's born a cow. A cow breeds cows, and humans breed humans, but our state is such, our spiritual state, our nature is twisted or broken, that we're fallen. So human beings create other fallen human beings. Well, Jesus isn't in that class. He doesn't have a fallen nature, and I don't want to go into it here because some of it's speculation, but I mean, he was conceived immaculately through the Holy Spirit. So his father is God, not Joseph. And so if the sin, nature is transferred through the father, well, then he circumvents the sin nature because his father's God and is perfect. So anyway, now I've distracted myself. Where was I? Oh, the Vedic text. So we see in antiquity these writings talking about these battles between these gods. And like I said, the Bible's not zeroing in on that, but there are texts that allude to the idea that there were these, so Genesis 6, look it up if you have the interest to follow up on what I'm talking about here. But Genesis 6, and there's, the idea that there were these battles and wars, and even the wars of Joshua, but there were these battles and wars between supernatural and, earthly human beings. And, so I don't throw out everything that Buddhism has to say wholesale. I don't just chuck the whole lot. I think it does have truth intermingled in there, but it's where it comes down to the gospel, the good news. What is the news of salvation through Buddhism? Well, the way of salvation, the eightfold path, first of all, it's all works-based. Humanity, a person has to save themselves basically through Buddhism, and they do that by doing everything right. Well, I hate to break it to you, but it's too late. You've already messed up. And that's what the Bible's saying. From day one, you're a human being, you're fallen, broken. Of course, we're not judged in Revelation, we're not judged by the fact that we're born broken, but we make mistakes right out of the gate. We're sinful in our behavior right out of the gate. And, we're rebellious against God. Well, in Buddhism, and frankly, quite frankly, every other worldview other than Christianity, in all those worldviews, it's the man saving himself. And I say man meaning humankind. Humans have to save themselves. So it's required of us to bootstrap ourselves up and save ourselves. Well, Christianity is saying, look, you can't do it yourself. You're unable. It's like, the person who has the disease trying to heal themselves. It's too ingrained in you to save yourself. Christianity is saying, look, you want to be saved, then appeal to God. He's the one who can do it for you, and he's willing and wants you to. And I think it's innate in our nature, like I said, that we desire that. We long for that. We to deny what Buddhism wants us to do, to deny the brokenness, which would mean dualism, and just to say all is one, there is no problem, it just flies in the face of our human experience, and hence back to the correspondence view of reality. Like, this just doesn't smack of reality. And just the fact that Buddhism or any of these Eastern philosophies make a distinction between right and wrong, that's duality. So they're already refuting their own claims of oneism and monism. A couple of the things, maybe it might be helpful just to talk about, because you talked about Hinduism, and Buddhism and Hinduism differ in the fact that, when Siddhartha Gautama, who was the Buddha, the progenitor, we'll call it, of Buddhist thought, first of all, it's interesting to note that he didn't write any of these things down. The writings of Buddhism come like 500 years, probably at best, after the death of the person who started Buddhist thought. So he grew up in a Hindu environment. In reality, he was dissatisfied with it. So there's a legend that goes along with it. I won't go into the whole legend about how he became enlightened, but I won't go into it here. It'll take too long. But basically, in order to to work outside of the context of the Hindu beliefs, he had to deny a few things. So one of the things that he was displeased with was the caste system, and that's like basically like a hierarchy in Hinduism. So he rejected Hindu thought and whittled down the things that make Buddhism what it is. So Buddhism and Hinduism do have some commonalities, but I just wanted to bring that up because you had mentioned Hinduism.
Yeah,
and,
I brought up, but okay. So can we nail down what their beliefs are then? Are these guys Hindus
who's
or are they
that?
Buddhists? Well, let's say Anderson.
Well, yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's hard to say, and to play their game, to get in and on their same level as them. I'm going to have to say that if they're being intellectually honest, which if they're, let's just give them the benefit of the doubt. If they're being intellectually honest, they're not going to be able to really land anywhere and make sense of it. To say, I mean, I think they could say that they were Hindu and probably be somewhat consistent, but I think in the nature of the whole Eastern philosophy itself, I think the whole thing is you really don't have to call yourself anything, any one thing. I think that's a problem. To say that I am this, so it's not really a religion, it's a mindset, so I personally don't know what, Anderson would call himself or how, for that matter, or any of them for that matter. I just know the things that they're putting out in the lyrics, and, they would probably even say that Christianity is a valid, mindset, worldview, religion, because they have to.
Well, I'd say so because Anderson works with Wakeman a fair bit, and Wakeman is open about his Christianity.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, the whole thing becomes nebulous. When you stand back and look, like the whole thing becomes nebulous, and I get that that's part of the appeal because they want to think that the chains are off. I'm free. Nebulous is better. But I guarantee you they don't live their lives this way. And that's where it comes down to the pragmatism and practicality of all these worldviews. It's like, can you live it? Can you live it out? Can you every day say, can you look at a dying loved one who's suffering and say to them at their bedside, there really is no such thing as suffering. Like, how callous and deluded must somebody be? But now the payoff is going to be that I can do whatever I want, right? The morality has no hold on me. If I can sleep around with whoever I want, I can take whatever drugs I want, I can do all this thing. And then we come to find out that the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path have a whole bunch to do with doing the right things, right? Well, I thought we were beyond rules and regulations. I thought there were no chains to hold us down, that this was all.
No, but yeah, that's right. Because what you just said about, that sort of crazy lifestyle, the Buddhists wouldn't want to live that lifestyle. Right.
And so the whole thing falls back on itself, and it's really difficult to nail it down, and I think it's done that way intentionally. And to be quite honest, I think that there's deception behind this at a spiritual level, and I think that the deception has a wide open door through transcendental meditation for people who are human beings who are fallen and broken are just ready to hear that they're a god, and that there are no rules, and do what thou wilt. I mean, who do we get that from? Do what thou wilt. So shall it be the whole of the law, right? I mean, that's Satanism. So
Crowley.
Yeah. And the Christian worldview and ethos says, no. There are rules, and the rules are good. And, you've broken every one of them, by the way, but you can be reconciled, which is really what you ultimately want and need, whether you're willing to admit it or not. And Garth, that's only through the blood of Jesus Christ. And that's where I land.
Right. Well, yes, so do I, but I wanted to ask you this. Let's hold the mirror up to ourselves. And can we answer the question, can we live up to what our beliefs are? Can we live up to what our scriptures expect of us?
I think no. And I think that's the beauty of it, is the fact that I can't uphold God's standards. There's no way. It's too late. I've already broken them. So for me to uphold it now, it's a moot point, really, right? Because I've already broken all the laws, every single one of them. So I am unable. And when I admit that, And when I appeal to Jesus and his perfect, righteous, and someone who has upheld everything, and I put on his righteousness, guess what happens? The chains come off. I'm free. And that's the true freedom, I think, that should be desired by people.
But you're not saying that freedom allows you to do anything, because there are rules and boundaries, as we've been discussing through the course of this discussion here. That doesn't mean to say me and you can go and do whatever we like now, because we can just say, well, God's forgiven us, and off we go down the road and do whatever we want, right? You're not saying that.
No, and I think the beauty and the catch of it is, what I'm saying is, I don't want to do everything and anything. I want to do the right things now. Like my desires are such that they're bent. Let's just say they're straightened out. Before they were bent, now they're straightened out. And now I want to do the right things. Like the desire for me, let's say, to use drugs or get drunk or have, sex any way that I want it, however it feels good, or just to live a lifestyle that's completely reckless abandon. Now I realize that's damaging and harmful, and not only to me but to others as well. But so my desires have changed. So now I can live. I'm able to live exactly as I want to, because my desire is such that that those things it's possible for me to do that now. So yeah, I think it has more to do with, because I think someone who might say, well, hey, I'm saved, through Jesus, or I'm saved by God, your Christian doctrine, your Christian gospel. Now I can go do whatever I want. I think that's a person who doesn't understand it to begin with. The idea is not to just do whatever we want. That's, in the sense of our old ways, and appeals to the flesh and things like that. But so yeah, I feel more free now than I ever did. And I have a peace that I never had before. So I don't know if that answers your question. I mean, because we could unpack that whole thing for all these tangents have the potential of spending a whole episode on. So
no, I know, but I just sort of throw that in there. I think it's always good to hold the mirror up to yourself and say, well, okay, where do we? What questions could be asked of us as Christians? What would people say? Well, can you live up to what you believe? Because we might say that some of these Eastern beliefs are very difficult to maintain. We might say that. So,
right.
I think we've got to be prepared to be asked the same question.
Right. And when I identify with Christ, which my identity now is in Christ, someone who did live the perfect lifestyle, or not lifestyle necessarily, I mean, perfect life. So it helps me to be humble, and I think I take my proper place in that hierarchy that I spoke of earlier, as to, mankind is not fit to be God, and that should be obvious by just pick up the newspaper, or turn on the TV, and you see that mankind is not fit to be. He's not the kind of creation to be. There's graveyards everywhere you turn. We're obviously not fit to be God. So to put us in the wrong strata of that hierarchy is only going to make things more difficult for us and damage us. We're putting things on our shoulders that we're unable to do or live out. And quite frankly, we have to tell lies in order to try to maintain that facade. But, so it's very humbling and very freeing to know your spot in the hierarchy, that we're not complete junk. We're not a rock. We're not dirt. We're not, and I'm talking about in value. We're more important than inanimate objects and things like that. But we're not at the top of the heap either. We're in there, and we're valuable, and we're important. And that's why God came here to earth. He humbled himself to show us, to be an example for us, not only to save us from our sin, but also to help us to see how to be humble ourselves. And the real true freedom and real true leadership is the person who is willing to be humble and be served. Like, the person who's in control doesn't need to wield it and lord it over you. The person who's really in control, I mean, look at read the claims of Christ, read what Jesus said. He was in control of the whole situation, and he was calm and cool. You know what I mean? And because the person who's in control doesn't need to rail against anything, and human beings spend their entire days railing against each other and everything, you know. So
well, that comes with the dissatisfaction in life. But Brian, we could just go on, couldn't we? And you and I do sometimes, but we don't record it. Maybe that's
right.
a good thing. I don't know. So we finish up here. I've enjoyed our discussion. And really, I would really love to have done a third part on Yes, because there's so much more I wanted to talk about. But I don't know, maybe in the future one time, hey, 50 requests for a Yes Part 3, we'll do one. How does that sound?
That sounds good. Maybe we could even zero in on one particular album or something like that.
Right.
It would be really cool to pick it apart. But
yeah, okay. Yeah, so if 10 of you pick the one album together, and we're not going to tell you what that is, we'll do that one as a part 3. So I wanted to ask you, Brian, before we move on and we say our goodbyes, what has been on your turntable this week?
Well, there's been a lot on my turntable, but I'll tell you the one that I keep coming back to recently is the newest album from the band High Spirits from Chicago. They have a new album called Hard to Stop, and it's hard to stop listening to. It's I don't know how familiar a lot of people will be. They're kind of like an underground band, I guess, at this point. I guess they're probably bigger in the metal scene, but they're not full on metal. They're kind of like metal in the way Thin Lizzy was metal, like good riffs, melody, but not a lot of it's not, you know, filled with it's more about the songs than it is about the individual players, you know, like not a lot of just, you know, virtuosity going on for the sake of showmanship. But yeah, their new album, I ordered it before on pre-order, and I had to get it from Germany, so it costs like $30 US, and then it costs another $40 to ship it to me. And then when I got the thing, because I got the clear vinyl with the blue splatter in it, and that was like a limited run, and I got it here, and it looked like somebody had baked it in the oven. It was all warped, and so then I had to petition the record label, and he was kind enough to get it out to me as soon as he could, but it took me a while to get another copy. But it's good stuff, man. I'll call it, like, lyrically, it's got a positive bent to it.
Okay.
And I like that. And it's just got really good riffs, really driving, rocking, kind of, not a lot of chunky metal, not a lot of like polyrhythmic riffs, like, you know, gallop riffs or anything like that. It's more of kind of like old Judas Priest thing, British Steel era, that kind of stuff. And the singer's got a distinct voice, but he's not like soaring high vocals or anything like that. It's kind of more mid-range, but a lot of melody going on, and it's really cool, catchy choruses and stuff. So I highly recommend it. But now, tell us what's spinning on your turntable.
Well, my wife and I have been listening to Elf, and as you know, that's Ronnie James Dio's band.
Yep. 3
albums in the, 72, 73, I think, 74, 75, somewhere around there. Yeah, I like, you know, I'm a fan of Dio, himself, his voice. I really think he is got one of the better voices in the universe. And I don't know, it's funny, when I listen to him, I go, hey, you know, that's Southern rock, you know, but it's sort of, some of the songs you hear boogie woogie piano in there.
Yep.
You hear sort of, like blues and, Southern rock and a bit of all that stuff. And I do actually like that, see? So that's kind of one of my, genres that appeals to me. So yeah, they had the 3 albums out, in that era. And, as any fan of Dio would know, that band actually went on to become the basis of Richie Blackmore's Rainbow. I think it was 3 or 4 members of Elf ended up being on that first album.
Yeah, just the first album, yeah.
Yeah, the first album, yeah. So, yeah, Dio was obviously the singer, and I think the 3 other members ended up going with him. So, you know, and Rainbow is another story. But, no, Elf, good listening. Good bit of fun listening, you know. Yeah, I kind of think of it as sort of southern rock, country rock, blues sort of mixed together. So good old fashioned stuff, you know. I really like it a lot.
Yeah.
So that's what we actually, my wife and I sat down. We listened to the whole catalogue in one sitting. One afternoon, a couple of Saturdays ago. So that's the main one that we've been, because I listened to a whole lot of stuff. Obviously for this, we've been listening to a bit of Yes, but I always listen to Yes anyway. But yeah, that would be it.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. I really like the Elf stuff. And boogie woogie is the exact term that I would have used too. It's kind of sounds kind of funny, but I mean it's that piano, that choppy piano.
Yes.
And it's really good stuff. I really like the stuff that they did, and Dio's got some interesting lyrics and that stuff too. But yeah, I'm a huge Elf fan, which
cool.
Talk about huge Elf. I mean, elves are typically small, but anyway. But yeah, so I totally get it, man. I'm a big fan of Elf myself, and I guess it's a good time of the year to be listening to Elf, right around Christmas. So.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, we're not far off that. Alrighty, okay. Well, we'll leave it there, Brian. Thanks for your time. Thanks for coming on board and your contributions. Absolutely brilliant. Really enjoyed this one. Like I say, I could have done another one, but we won't unless we get specific request. So we'll leave it there for now. And as usual, I will just say God bless and hooroo.
And Garth, I want to say thank you to you, and just to the people, our listeners out there. I want to say thanks for cutting us some slack and giving us some grace and letting us spout on about, one of our favorite bands. And, also just to try to unpack these, really complex ideas and really, rich, topics and themes, like not only the philosophy itself, but even the music and the musicians themselves. I mean, this is all really complicated and really, really colorful territory, and we realized that we probably didn't do it the justice that it deserves. But I'm just thankful to you, Garth, and I'm thankful to God for the platform here to be able to offer something for people to think about at the very least, right? Just so to plant a seed or water an existing seed, and so I'm thankful for that, Garth. And I can't wait till next time. Looking forward to it. I know we've got more material than we've got lifespan to cover here. So thank you again. And from the United States, happy trails. It's Brian signing off.